So we think about this core challenge. We need to step back and understand, okay, why are there different signals, or what kind of feedback is coming from each team or each part of the organization, and how can we now start to crosswalk those experiences? So on the customer experience side, most often this is the part of the organization that has directly day-to-day interaction with customers around their adoption, their use, their management of the particular technology or that account. That's usually where that sits, and it can be everything from what may be thought of as an account manager, or someone that's making sure the health and use of that customer is continuing. It could be a support team who's addressing technical or non-technical issues. It could even be a team that's about growing or realizing the value out of that account. But that's typically what customer experience. That's typically that part of the organization. And the kind of signals they hear, or the feedback that they often hear, revolves around just overall sentiment. Sometimes you'll see NPS either come from this part or a product, but sentiment. How much do you like, or how much do you trust the organization that you're working with? How much do you like and trust the products in general? How confident are you that those products are having impact? How do you know they're driving the outcomes that you've sought in leveraging those products? And even, are your teams, do they have the resources that they need to be successful? Do they have access to those resources? Are they able to understand new releases or new information that's being shared? In general, that's relationship health. And those are the kinds of signals. It can be NPS, it can be customer satisfaction surveys, it can be anecdotal conversations, it can be participation in customer experience activities. Are they showing up to webinars? Are they engaging in community exchanges? It could even be, are you seeing them ask questions about their ongoing subscriptions, licenses, or use of the technology? So those are a lot of signals, and those actually are really important signals, but they are not typically the signals that the product part of the organization will hear or be leveraging. On the product side, the signals typically come from how well are products being used? Where are they being used? By whom? How are we seeing adoption grow? What kinds of feedback around specific product pieces are we receiving? Are we, choosing to launch new releases and we're seeing people adopt them quickly, or are they slow to adopt that? And then are they getting value out of the intended purpose of those features? And then finally, product organizations are also hearing scale or volume or growth and the speed of that growth. So these are all really important components of feedback that you can be looking for, regardless of where you are in this organization or you're leading both pieces. But you can already see where the gaps may happen. They typically, there's a disconnect that can happen. And most often, if we think about expectations of customers, they will end up, we'll see them in the customer experience part of the organization. Well, it's often the product organization that needs to solve those around particularly things like usability, adoption, and value. So what do? Well, we need to be thinking about how we manage the fact in the organization that feedback isn't the problem. We have all sorts of signals. This is true at our organization. We get tons of information and signals, and you can really think about all of the places where customers are sharing their insights with you, either directly or indirectly through their behaviors. But that's not the problem. What the problem is how do we marry those two collections of signals so that it doesn't feel like one group is blaming the other group, or one group doesn't feel like they have the right information to inform the other group, or together we're seeing lower adoption of the kinds of technologies or solutions or services or whatever it may be that you're serving, that is lower than expected from both parts of the organization. If you think about it, while we can see usage data on the product side, we may not understand the why. And on the customer experience side, while we may hear, I don't want to adopt that, we may not see the why in those adoptions. So really what it is about the true solution here is about bringing these two parts of the organization together, crosswalking that feedback, and helping to understand what a full customer journey cycle rich with feedback would look like. So let's think about what combined metrics can be. This is the first step in understanding how to match or how to think about both collections of feedback. As I mentioned before on the customer experience side, you'll see things like CSAT. So often in CSAT, those are customer satisfaction surveys. They typically are around and sent to the buyer of the products, and they are, or the administrator of the solutions, and they are often focused on things like overall satisfaction and trust. But they can then be married over to things like time to first value in a product organization. You can actually ask questions in your CSAT around, are you seeing value? How long did it take you to see value? You can be very deliberate around how you path a customer journey so that you're getting the key points of feedback at each stage. Another typical metric, now this one you can see in customer experience or in product, depending on where and how this is collected. Oftentimes, if it's embedded in the product itself, you'll see it in the product organization. If it's about a separate sort of survey activity, you'll see it in customer experience, but that's NPS. And NPS is really very simple if you're not familiar with it. Would you recommend this solution to someone else? And together, that piece of feedback can indicate feature adoption, but it can also indicate customer health at a layer that perhaps a CSAT doesn't unpack. Similarly, if you think about metrics like customer health or health dashboards, which both Jody and I have helped to implement, that's a really important overall view into the customer that the product organization needs to see. But at the same time, they need to then marry into customer health that adoption of capabilities and the full use of those capabilities, and how repetitive are those capabilities being used, or that stickiness to that. And then that finally leads back into a metric that you'll see in customer experience, which can be either the renewal or the continued use of that particular technology. If you think about it, though, at a very simple level, on the product side, metrics talk about what customers do, while on the CX side, they talk about how they feel. But you need to know feel and do together in order to best serve your customers. So if you think about this, and then we're going to step into the activity that we're going to do in the chat. If you think about this, you want to move from feedback to action. If you think about steps in taking those elements of feedback, and it's great that both parts of the organization collect that feedback. That's wonderful. That's what's expected. They should be gathering all of that. But if you think about collecting that feedback together, that then can be mapped against customer outcomes. And any suggestion, I've seen many institutions struggle with, well, when customer purchased the technology or adopted the technology, they had one set of outcomes. We've now had change in stakeholders, and we're seeing that they're still not happy, even though they've met their outcomes. Well, customer outcomes need to be tied to customer expectations, and those need to be documented and shared with customers and with the customer experience and the product organizations. So if we all come together and understand very clearly a set of outcomes and timelines to those outcomes as a three-pronged stool, if you want to call it, that customer outcome is what you can then drive to or ask questions about as you look at product signals. Now, product signals tend to be leading indicators. They tend to come much quicker. You can see them in flight. Who's using what? How are they using it? How are we seeing adoption? Well, validation in the customer experience team can often come later. It can either come through a renewal, it can come through the CSAT, which is often done maybe once or twice a year. It can come when people have problems, right? You might not hear from somebody until they're actually struggling down the road with using a technology or a feature. So you've got your customer outcomes. You can then watch product signals to see how are they tracking to those outcomes. You can then use validation in the customer experience team as well to understand those outcomes. And in fact, In stage 2, as your product signals, you can use that to trigger additional validation points if you're seeing patterns that are abnormal within CX, so that they can shift from even lagging indicators to be more leading indicators. And then together, because you started with that combined set of customer outcomes, you can drive towards shared action together. This is where you build efficiency together. This is where you truly satisfy your customers. This is what you can map against a customer journey map.